I'm here with Ash Days, the creator of the Giant of Greywater. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes. So my name is Ash Days, and I've been working on this comic for quite a long time. So I'm super happy to be here and talk about it and to meet you.
Yeah, you too. I'm really happy to have you here. So, did you just want to tell us about a bit about your comic?
Yes. So my comic is a romantic fantasy comic. I've been working on it for, oh my goodness, the better part of 10 years.
Hmm.
And just the long and short of it is that it's a story about a young girl that decides to move her family out of a forest filled with monsters. Their world is plagued with these unkillable monsters, and the only place of safety are kingdoms that have basically been built to ward them off, because the only people that can kill them are mages. But being born a mage is extraordinarily rare, and so they have to make do with what they have. So she tries to move every one of her family members into this kingdom just to find that it's plagued by a giant. So that is something that she's dealing with, something that she's going to learn, that this giant has more to do with her than she realizes. And it just kind of goes from there.
Yeah, and I checked it out and I read some of it and really enjoyed it because it's fantasy and comics isn't usually my thing, but I think the pacing was really good and
Thank
definitely got me
you.
hooked.
Oh,
One of the
thank you.
things, yeah, no worries. One of the things because when I was reading it, a lot of stories like this, they kind of the end reveal is that there are no monsters, and so I was really happy to see that it kind of follows through on what it is. Um,
Yes, there are for sure monsters. Pretty much with this story, there isn't. There's a lot of like the redemption tropes. This seems segueing into something weird, but like there's a lot of like this popularity of redemption tropes and like that. Oh, these things aren't real. This was just like a political thing that we lied to you about.
yeah, things
Um,
like the village.
exactly, exactly. This is not what that is.
Yeah, I was really happy to see that. So, could you tell us a bit about the inspirations behind it?
So for me, I'm a huge fan of the Grimm fairy tales. My parents, my mom was very into reading. She wanted us to read anything and everything. But unfortunately for me, I kind of was very slow at reading as a kid. I'm not sure what it was, but for me, I just didn't take to reading as my two younger sisters did, and I would read a lot of like picture books,
Yeah,
and it was mainly just because I enjoyed the art, obviously, but out of frustration, my mom gave me the Grimm fairy tales because they're shorter. They're meant to be shorter stories in a collection. So I remember reading all of those and just like, even though they're kind of dark a lot of the time,
yeah,
they're very, very interesting on a storytelling basis. And a lot of those were an inspiration. There's actually a current YouTube series that I found when I was younger called Grimm Fairy Tale Anime Classics or something like that. It's free, and it's a huge inspiration for a lot of the characters just because it's a little silly, but it's always a fun watch. So I would say that one is a big one. That one and pretty much any kind of Ghibli film would be a big inspiration. The I think the main one is Princess Mononoke. That one
hmm
is a huge one. I adore that movie as a kid. I think that was one of the first like anime movies I ever saw as a kid. And that one was just I was obsessed with it for a really long time. So just like that combination is the inspiration for this comic.
yeah, definitely. It shows through in a good way. I think on the reading front, I think that's really important. As a lot of people will jump into comics or novels or whatever, but they don't really stick with it enough to see what they like. They just kind of dismiss it on what they don't like. And
Yes, yes, true.
yeah, so I think it's really important to find what you do like and let that inspire you.
I think it's really nice that we can kind of, the internet helps us get access to things that would be much harder for a lot of us to find. Like, there's a lot of older media that unless YouTube wasn't around, I would have never known it existed. So
Yeah.
that's something I'm personally grateful for. It's helped me learn, especially just learning a lot of things. I never went to art school. I'm actually I during the day, my day job, I'm a accountant,
Yeah.
and at night is when I sit home and I work on my comic. And I've never had any formal education in art, and everything I know about art was through YouTube tutorial videos growing up.
Well, you're definitely very talented as well.
Well, thank you.
So
That's very kind
yeah,
of you.
yeah. So you said it's been going on for 10 years. Would you say this is something that you're going to keep up for pretty much as long as you can?
Absolutely. It's certainly a long form, slow burn romance.
Yeah.
So, I do estimate it taking me at minimum probably another 10 years just to make the comic, and I'm very committed to that.
Well, I think there's definitely a lot of people who like hearing that kind of commitment and longevity. I think it's what's made manga so successful.
That's actually a great point. I was a little afraid, people would not that they wouldn't be patient enough for it, but definitely thinking like, "Oh my goodness, when is this gonna end?" kind of thing. And I've written it so it doesn't feel that way. It doesn't feel like there's, um, a bunch of, like, side segues, unnecessary events that take place. Everything feels on purpose, which is admittedly why it took so long to write it, just because when I first thought of the idea, I was not any kind of storyteller. It was, I still actually have I wrote out the first version by hand because I was in my college days in my classes, just I was supposed to be taking notes, but I, was writing out the entire plot, and I have it still in the 3-ring, like, a spiral notebook that I have in my drawer right now. And if I read it right now, I'm a little afraid I'm gonna cringe really hard because it's kind of awful. But it is the first version of it, and it is the version that, I've been rewriting. I think I've rewritten it, 7 to like 6 to 7 times, right, as now it stands.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I actually published like a short story on Amazon about a year ago and went back and reread it, and I was just like, oh my god, I you when you're still trying to find your footing on writing, it's definitely a struggle.
What would you say is your, preferred writing process? Because I think writing for a comic is unique in its own way.
Oh, so I'm only on my first comic at the moment. I've done some, I've written some short stories in books that I put up on Amazon, but for a comic, it's usually, I sort of write out as like a mini novella, and then I try and fit the most important sequences into panels.
That's pretty good. I like that. That's very, there's I'm so sorry, I'm terrible with words, but that's kinda how I work it. I do kinda the same thing. Unfortunately, when I had, people read mine, it reads sort of like a, emotionless Wikipedia page. So
Yeah,
that was more the complaint that I received.
yeah. I think if I were to publish mine as its own novella, it would be really because you really focus on kind of descriptions and direction and that kind of thing, not so much the finer details that I think people usually look for in prose.
That's actually a great point. And especially when you're talking about making a comic, it's important to at least in the planning phase because you're kind of giving yourself directions for how you're setting up the panel, how the characters are interacting, henceforth their emotions, their reactions, their stances, just the
Yeah,
design of every panel. And it's easier when you're taking any like guessing work away by writing down that emotion. I think that's something that has helped me a lot, certainly.
yeah. One of the interesting things for me was when I was trying to write out these like not for comics but just regular stories. I was, there's always a word count that people want you to read, and I found that I met the word count a lot easier in writing out a comic book script than I did writing out an actual story.
Oh, interesting. Is and would you say that that's more just because that flows out a little bit easier for you?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, you kind of you're always describing a single snapshot. So
That's
yeah,
very true.
yeah, and I think it just
Interesting.
naturally, yeah, it just naturally comes out of that kind of structure.
I'm always interested in hearing how a comic creator writes their comic simply because I'm not a writer. I
Hmm.
am an artist first,
Yeah.
and my sisters, because like I said, my mom was very into getting us to be well read. My two younger sisters, they're brilliant. One is a lawyer and the other is an engineer. They're very smart and writers. So when I, as the person that is not the writer, and I give them my things, I feel like they kind of help me filter out those, I guess, inconsistencies that I'm not seeing. Because simply just my brain just doesn't work that way. It just, I don't think I could ever write a book version of this because I don't have really that thought mindset for writer's prose at all.
Yeah, I think it becomes a lot more daunting if you're writing in 12 issues at a time of comics.
Yes, absolutely. That is also a lot. I mean, I think, at least personally, I am I don't find any issues when I'm writing dialogue, which happens to be obviously the core of a comic script.
Hmm.
But it's something about, admittedly, when you're writing the descriptions of the panels, that's sort of where I struggle. I even kind of like skip those sometimes and just write the dialogue, and then I fill out the descriptors at a later time, just because the dialogue seems to work a little bit more naturally for me.
One of the things I liked about the dialogue in your comic is it feels very authentic. It feels like a conversation you can imagine, kids having with their family and that kind of thing. And it's something that I think a lot of professional comic book writers try and get a bit too clever with, and you know what I mean? They just kind of fill out the word balloons, and it ends up feeling really clunky.
I appreciate you saying that. Really, like, I did a lot of studying on dialogue. That's actually kind of one of my main factors when I'm reading a comic. It's sort of, if I'm reading it and it doesn't sound like two humans that would say those things to each other, it kind of takes me out of the world that they've worked so hard to build.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that's just a really important, because that's how pretty much all information is going to be. I'm sorry, not all information. The art is going to give you information, but any kind of dialogue, any kind of words that you're going to be reading is through dialogue. So you sort of
Yeah.
have to figure out how to do that correctly, or your readers are going to get a little bit frustrated with you.
Yeah, and on the front of being, an artist first, I think there's a lot of people who really do look for that. Speaking for myself, I'm a big fan of. I don't know how big into American superhero comics you are, but big fan of people like Darwin Cook and Neil Adams.
God, you know what? Admittedly, I am more of a like a indie small comic kind of person. So,
Yeah,
and I'm
um,
awful with names. I apologize.
well, I think it's true of indies as well. A lot, you see that the writer and the artist are the same person, and that gives people
Yes.
consistency that I think they really want.
I agree. It's actually, it's, and this works kind of the same when I look at like indie video games, like if it's someone that creates something on Steve or not Steam.
Yeah,
um, just look like, I am pretty fascinated with the thought process behind the creation. I think it's, and I don't mean that in like a slight in any way. I genuinely am very interested in, this is how this person tells a story. It's like when I have a conversation with someone and they're telling me their story, and they've pick and choose what events are important to tell me, and that's kind of how a comic looks like to me. And I think it's pretty cool to see the psychology behind the creator in that way.
yeah, I definitely agree, and I think everything just kind of fuses together better.
Yeah, yeah, it does. It's definitely a something you gotta you gotta practice and do. I've definitely made, this isn't the first comic I've made. I've made little um, uh, silly ones that in my younger years that were not great. And I remember right before this one, I was very into horror comics, um, scary stuff. I'm a huge fan of Junji Ito. His work, I have almost all of his books in my library just because I just love that kind of stuff. And I made my own horror comic, and I was silly and I put it on Webtoons, and Webtoons said, "Don't put this on our site."
Yeah. Did you
It's
manage to
not.
find did you manage to find somewhere to host it?
You know what? No, I haven't. To be fair, I it's one of those I look back on it and I'm just like, maybe I'll save this for some other time. It's one of those cringy, oh, I don't know if I want to show people this.
Oh yeah, I definitely know what you mean. So
It's
speaking
okay.
of uh, well, first of all, I will say that I think horror comics are one of the more underrated genres, just because it's so hard to get right because you don't have music or jump scares or anything.
Yeah, it's actually a pretty interesting middle of a storytelling method because horror is interesting in which you get the scares because you're not really understanding what you're seeing. You're just seeing kind of the aftermath of whatever's plaguing these people. And that's, I think, in your mind is what creates that horror. Because you'll notice if you watch, play, read anything, the true scary part of the story is typically the beginning parts. It's when you're not understanding what's going on. You're seeing the probably terrible aftermath of this thing that's hurting people, and then something, and eventually they're going to show you what it is, and then you're less afraid. You're like, oh, I can problem solve now because I know what I'm up against. Some of the better medias or storytellers that kind of withhold that information for as long as possible are the ones that shine for me.
Oh, I feel completely the same way. I I don't know if you're a big fan of Jeepers Creepers,
I
um,
am.
but for me, the the beginning scene where they drive past him and he's just dumping the sheets down the that was the scariest bit of the whole film,
That, yes,
and
exactly.
he just gives them that look as they drive by, and you're like, oh my god, what's going to happen?
Oh my god, it's that he knows and he's gonna hunt me down now.
Yeah,
That's
it's that kind
exactly what
of
it is.
yeah, it's just building that tension and suspense, and yeah, I mean, a lot of horror gets a lot less scary when like when Freddy Krueger starts speaking.
It's very true. And I think that's where comics have a bit of a challenge, that like an uphill battle, because you have to be a little bit creative in how you build that tension, because everything about a comic is visual. I think the easiest
Yeah.
way to tell a horror story is through a book, simply because there are never any pictures. There's always up to you. And
Hmm.
a video game, you're experiencing it in a way. So that in its own way has its advantages. But comics, you're presented with the world in front of you in a visual way, and the writer and the artist have to be a little clever in how they imply things that are happening, and that is definitely very challenging. And I think that's why horror comics are I wouldn't say, because I think they are underrated, but that's not the word I'm looking for. I think they're appreciated by the people who genuinely understand this concept,
Yeah.
and that's why they're so beloved, because it's so hard to do.
Yeah, and when you get it right, you get it really right.
Absolutely. And Junji Ito, he's fantastic. He has a plenty of like amazing works, but there are even some in the collection that I have that I read. I'm like, oh, that was a little bit silly. It's very hard to pull off. It's just you can't get it
Yeah.
right every time. So I do admire people who are trying to make any kind of scary comic, because it's really an endeavor on its own. And then it feels bad because not a lot of people are super into it. I mean, I remember I was having a conversation with another creator recently about the bias in genres. Um, Fantasy, romance, those are kind of the top genres At least they've been at the top. I know romance has always been kind of a top media for pretty much forever. That's just in any media ever. People just prefer that.
Yeah, I think so too. And you see the problem with the big two, which is that they're not really willing to fully commit to new genres. It's always, if they try horror, if they try fantasy, it always ends up being pulled back to superhero.
Yes. Yes, exactly. And I think, and especially with like the American style comics, I think that style has become sort of the expectation for that, which isn't fair. I think
Yeah,
that style is so wonderful and it has so much potential. And I know that there are creators that have made fantastic versions of that in other genres. It's just that when people see that, they think, Marvel, DC, Dark Horse, all of them, they just want the superhero.
yeah, and I think if you're a fan of things outside of superhero, I think now is things have gotten better over the last few years, especially in the smaller companies, like Boom.
Yes, I think I actually agree with that. I think when I was younger, there wasn't that much variety
Hmm.
of really anything. And now that I think everyone has a little bit more access to things, we're able to not only make our own, but also kind of just showcase our stuff to a wider audience. And I think that's a huge advantage. Like a huge, I know it, I know a lot of artists and creators and writers feel very discouraged just because there's so many, medias out there. There's so many comics, there's so many movies, books, things being made. And it's so hard to get your stuff to like get someone just to read your stuff. And I completely empathize with that. But you also have to kind of think of what happened, 10, 20 years ago where it wasn't the difficulty was getting it through a gatekeeper. You had
Yeah,
to impress one person on the off chance this person likes your stuff is when then people would see it. And I think that's our challenge is, in my opinion, an easier one to overcome. Your work is not on the basis of a single opinion.
yeah. I think for the new kind of internet age of creators, it's a lot. The main struggle is really just finding an audience.
It is, and I think that struggle is very overcomable. Not
Yeah,
easy, but definitely overcomable. I think if you, in my opinion, you're making friends. You're making, you know, people who enjoy reading movies, watching movies, playing video games. Just you're finding these people that like the same things you do. It's just like you're making friends, and this grows naturally like anything. And I think that people who struggle with this are people who, unfortunately, at least in my opinion, have a bit of an ego to them.
hmm,
People
yeah. I
who,
think
yeah, just don't want to talk to other people, don't want to, I wouldn't say collaborate, but just don't have that inclination to have these conversations and these moments with people are people who struggle with this.
Yeah, I think part of it is that it's a big kind of mutual commitment that you don't really get from companies, where there's
Yes.
there's an expectation that you're gonna in a way kind of be there for each other, and that one of you's going to be putting the work in, the other one's going to stick around to to help give you that audience, keep you going forward. And I
Exactly.
think that some
This.
people just
Oh,
yeah, I was just
continue.
going
I'm
to say, and I
sorry.
think some people it's too much of a they're looking for too many short-term gains. They don't really have the patience to go all in.
Yeah, I do see that. I think that's a little bit of a hard part in our viewing audience at this moment. The attention spans are a little bit shorter, but in all fairness, I think that's just human nature. Our nature is to be as efficient as possible and to
Yeah,
spend the least amount of energy. So I don't fault anyone for that, honestly. Um,
yeah,
I
absolutely.
I think
So
actually. Oh yeah, go ahead.
oh no, you go ahead.
I'm sorry. I'm the great interrupter. I don't mean to. um,
No worries.
I I think on the shoot, what was I going to say? On that note, when it comes to kind of like being mutual and like reading each other's stuff on at least on webtoons, I'm trying to be better on the different platforms. When somebody offers me their comic, I try to make sure they know that I've read it, because I think there's kind of this thing that you can sort of get away with, and I think everyone implicitly knows this, where you can say you've read something and say that it's great and whatever and move on, but that doesn't do anyone a service. And in my opinion, you're missing an opportunity to make a friend, to make an ally, to make a supporter, to make a just all these benefits. You're just kind of missing out on it just because you didn't want to take maybe 30 minutes out of your day to read a comic. Um, Frankly, there's comics, and honestly, there are comics that I'm like not a super big fan of, but that doesn't mean it's a bad comic because I'm not a fan of it.
Definitely.
So it's that something I make sure to do is I try to leave a comment on every episode, whether they read it or not. Because in my opinion, that's in a way proof that I've read it, because I'm having and it's not just a wow way to it's not those like shallow comments. It's a question on what happened in the episode. I think that's important because I think there's always the kind of that lingering doubt, like, did you actually read it? Did you actually do this? You can't. There's always this distrust, and I want to break that um, by proving, yes, I have read it, and these are my feelings about it. I think that goes way longer, way farther in a human connection than people give it credit for.
Yeah, I think it's always worth saying that I think constructive criticism is a lot better than a shallow affirmation, like a thumbs up emoji. I'd much rather have someone say, here's where I think you went wrong, than just get a smiley face.
Yes, yeah, because at the same time, I mean, how can you expect, especially if they're asking for it? It's one thing to kind of give it unsolicited, but it's another thing when someone is straight asking for it. They're looking to improve. I mean, it's two ways. I've had people who have asked for constructive criticism, and I have given it in a kindly way, and it's no one has ever been mean or rude to me, but they've definitely not been pleased with the response. So there's kind of that two-way street. If you're going to ask for it, you have to be prepared to not have someone be delighted with it either. That's
Yeah,
sort of the hard part.
yeah. And for me, I'm just happy when people do take the time, because I've sent recently I sent the comic off to someone, and I said, does this look like something you'd be interested in? And I got a message back saying, I'm not really a big Golden Age fan. And for me, I was kind of happy because it meant they'd actually taken the time to look into it, and that what I put out there did actually convey that it was a Golden Age story. So
That's
yeah,
excellent.
it's a lot better than being told, oh yeah, I will support this, and then they just never do. I'd
It
much
kind of
rather hear,
works.
yeah,
Sorry. It kind of works the same way with like if you're going to an interview and you don't get the job. It's very much the same thing. You have to a lot of the time, what you can do if you don't get the job is you can always email and very nicely ask, what can I improve on? And a lot of the time, they will respond with reasons why it didn't work. And you'd be surprised what they'll say. A lot of time, it's just like, oh, we just liked this person's experience more or something. It could be something out of your control, or it could not, and that's something you can improve on. So it's just that communication is so important just for general improvement on things, and you only have to ask for it.
yeah. I think that sincere feedback is always a lot better than being ghosted.
It's tough. It's tough, especially when, people don't want to hurt other people's feelings, and I empathize with that. I would hate to be that person
Yeah,
where they put down their pen and go, I can't do this. That would hurt me to know I've done that to someone. Um, but again, that's more of if you're asking for this, critique, then be prepared for the positives and the negatives. But it's also why I don't give unsolicited criticism that no one is prepared for that. I wouldn't want that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think that you can, if you, I think it's as important to listen to the feedback as to, think about it and see if you can actually deliver on it.
Exactly. Exactly. It's, I think just everyone's growing at their own pace, and just being there, knowing we're on the same journey, same pathway is, I think, something, people forget. We're all kind of looking at each other through a screen. It's very easy to dehumanize each other, like unintentionally so. Um, it's just like, like, this is the first time I'm hearing you speak. So at the same time, my
Hmm.
perspective, you were a person that I found online, and that's all I knew about you, and that's it. But now I'm hearing you speak, and now you're a person, and now you have opinions about things. You know what I mean? Like, it's easier to make a connection when you are, talking to someone. So when we're not doing that, it's very natural to kind of separate yourself emotionally from everyone else.
Yeah, it's definitely it's easier to be angry or disrespectful towards a piece of text than it is to someone where you can hear their tone of voice and you can hear their emotion, and it's a lot different.
It is. It is. It's something, I think that, a lot of we're working through, I suppose. I guess, for me, I grew up without too much technology. My family wasn't super into social media, so I wasn't on social media very frequently, and I always had, my friends close to me in my vicinity, so I always was speaking to them as they were just right next to me. So actually, social media is, pretty new for me, admittedly. I'm not very good at it.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same way. I didn't get social media, or I wasn't active on social media until midway through college, and
What would
yeah, I think it's something that you. Sorry.
I'm sorry. I was just gonna ask, what would you say is the hardest part about social media for you?
Uh, that's an interesting question. It really depends on what I'm using it for. So I've made my social media kind of more exclusive, centered around friends and that kind of thing, not as public as other people make theirs. So yeah, I mean, it really depends on what you're using it for. I think it always does come back down to kind of people being just needlessly uh, looking to start trouble and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I kind of feel that. It's kind of like they use it kind of like a diary, like a vocal diary in a way. Um,
Yeah.
and I do agree with you. I think that's never something I was looking for, at least going online, especially when I know a ton of other people are going to be saying it. That's something that's incredibly uncomfortable for me if I were to do that. And I agree with you. I think for me, it's kind of the same but opposite. I'm more afraid of unintentionally hurting someone's feelings. I have a bit of a uh,
Yeah.
I have a bit of a mouth on me. I it's it's um it's something that I will say, but like, I commit social blunders all the time, and I absolutely don't mean to. But you know, people interpret things the way they want to through text, and there's kind of nothing you can do about it. And it is what it is. But at the same time, I'd like to avoid that. And I think that's what makes um, me anxious to go online and to speak to anyone, because I'm always afraid that I'm going to just say something that, you know, offends someone, hurts someone's feelings, or, you know, any of the above. It that hasn't happened. That's a little bit of an irrational fear, but that's always in the back of my mind.
Yeah, and I think the good thing about Reddit in particular is that it's community based, so you're always interacting with people on a. There's always something that unites you.
Yes. I just recently got into Reddit, and I really, really like it. I like the fact that the opinions aren't sugar coated, ironically. I think it has a bit of a
Hmm.
reputation for being a bit harsh, but at the same time, that goes back to like the critique. You're asking a question, you're asking for an honest opinion, and people will absolutely give their honest opinion, and they aren't punished for it. I think that's a great part of it too. They aren't punished for giving an honest opinion versus, being a jerk.
Yeah, and one of the benefits of Reddit is that unlike Twitter, which I think is a bit more aggressive, you're not limited in your characters, so you can just
Yes.
write out a whole paragraph to explain how you feel.
Absolutely. Actually, maybe it's because I don't quite understand the platform perfectly, but I don't understand why there is a character limit on Twitter. It feels like a lot of people have gripes about that, and that that hasn't changed, I suppose.
Yeah, I think it's probably just something to do with maintaining more engagement. I guess people are more likely to keep scrolling and scrolling if it's shorter tweets.
That's a good point. That is a good point. It's
Yeah.
it's interesting because I'm obviously trying to learn every kind of medium, and there's always an interesting strategy because every platform is people consume their content differently per medium. And so there's a different way to
Yeah.
approach people and everyone. And that in itself, that psychology is pretty interesting to me, especially on a art perspective. If you're trying to, you know, express ideas through images, you know what I mean?
Hmm. Well, one of
Um,
the things I was going to ask you on that kind of front is as so I think about this from a writer perspective, but as an artist perspective for other artists listening into this interview, what kind of platforms would you say you have the most success in getting the word out?
that's a great question. I actually, before I even started posting the comic, I tried to kind of create a community in a way. I started on Instagram because naturally that felt like the most obvious one. It's an art platform, or it's an image based platform. And
Yeah.
like it's pretty good when you're trying to kind of learn things about the platform, but it's actually not the best. I don't recommend doing Instagram when you're trying to get any word out of your comic or really any kind of media. There's something about Instagram where people really struggle to. I think it's just the way that it's consumed. They don't want to leave. They don't want to like go to a different website. And I'm not saying that's not true for other mediums. It's just something about Instagram where they're kind of like content just quickly kind of scrolling through something. It's the rate in which they do it is so quick that I don't think they have the actual time to I wouldn't say read because you're not really reading anything, but like actually look at the thing that you're trying to tell them and comprehend it. And because they're just going through everything, they're just passively going through stuff. It's super super quick, and I gotta say, the moment I went to Reddit and Twitter is where I got the most success. The most success for me was definitely Twitter and Reddit, and I think that's just because people on those sites are very interested in like finding information outside of that platform. So they're very natural in leaving the platform, obviously coming back, but leaving and investigating or looking at something or whatever it is, and then coming back. And I think part of that is also that um, the vocabulary escapes me a bit, but the your icon, your the words next to your icon, you can kind of hover over it, and it allows you to see a bit of a snapshot of your bio instantly. And Instagram doesn't do that. Instagram doesn't allow you any kind of real leeway with your bio at all. It obviously wants you to stay on the platform as long as possible, but something about Twitter and Reddit in their pursuit of like information and understanding things is pretty top tier when you're trying to show people your comic. So I do recommend them first. I think Reddit has its pros. I think what was it? Someone said something very telling, and I always think about it. It was, I go to Instagram to work, but I go to Twitter to hang out. And I
Yeah.
think that's very true to the platform.
Yeah, I feel kind of the same way where, whenever I do something on Instagram, it's just I'm posting it and then I'm leaving. But on Reddit, I'm posting something and then I'm talking to people about it.
Yes, it's very community driven. I think Instagram has a bit of a reputation for being, I don't know how to say this nicely. It's kind of a reputation for inflating people's egos.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah, it's unfortunately it's one of those platforms where I used to really like it, and now I kind of just don't like being on it now. I will obviously because I do have to maintain it a bit, but anytime I go on it, it's just there's a bit of a strange ego politics going on that I'm not a super big fan of that I don't find in Reddit or Twitter at all. And honestly, I've tried to do Tumblr, and I don't quite understand how to do Tumblr yet, but I know it's also pretty good for just kind of getting stuff out too. But I haven't figured it out yet.
One of the things I'd recommend is I don't know if you've used Substack.
No, I haven't. What is that?
It's a website where everyone can make their own blog and it gets delivered like a newsletter.
That's pretty cool. It's called Substack. I'm gonna write that
Yeah,
down.
and I used that in kind of the run up to my campaign go on Indiegogo. So I had about 30 people on there who were just there for the updates and getting ready for the campaign to go up. And you know, engagement is kind of hit or miss. It depends on what you're doing, but a lot of people have. I mean, they actually have a comics version, so they have a way that you can put up comics and monetize it on there.
That's really cool. I've not heard of it. I'll check it out. I'm always I'm always trying to expand my horizons. I'm a little bit slow at that.
Yeah, and when you're making content, I think really exposure is that's the key to do it.
It's absolutely the key. It's although it's important not to overwhelm yourself with it either. I think there's a middle with that too,
Yeah,
because there are so
and
many different methods to do that on.
and also making sure that you're not annoying people with your exposure.
That's a big one. I do agree with that. I think that's something on a um, I think that's a method that I like to do. I don't know if a lot of people would agree with me, but um, and I'm only saying this because I don't have a better metaphor, but like there's the pistol method, which is constantly going posting things, and then there's the shotgun method, which is a big quality thing, but once in a while, like maybe
Hmm.
once a week at most. And for me, I found that that shotgun method just works much better for me. I'm way less stressed about, having to think of something to post all the time because I'm not my brain doesn't think that way. My brain doesn't work that way. And then having to purposely make content for like Instagram or like think of a question on Twitter or something like that. Like um, that's a little bit stressful for me, and when I think that I have to do that so frequently, I think it's like, it gives me unnecessary anxiety, frankly. Makes me not like the platform to my own, deficit, unfortunately.
Yeah, and in my own experience, you get a lot more negative feedback that way. If someone's like, "Didn't you post here yesterday and the day before? Stop it."
Yes,
You, that
exactly.
that ends up kind of cutting a bit deep, and yeah, so it's better to have a more diverse strategy where you can do it a little bit less frequently, but people are a bit more they're a bit less annoyed when they see it.
Something I will add, to the social media talk, in improving it, something that I've noticed that has helped immensely on all platforms is that you get what you give. And what that
Yeah.
means is that, and I'm sure everyone kind of understands what this means, but um, if you do not interact, if you don't talk to people, it's a social media. You're meant to be social. So if you're not doing that, you're not going to have any success of any kind. There's no reason why you would. And people see this. People know when they are it's kind of like in a real world conversation. If I try to talk to someone and they constantly ignore me, I'm not going to talk to them anymore. I'm just going to stop and go find someone else. It's very much the same way. So if you are always like making a post and never, I don't know, interacting with other people's posts, then you're just going to flounder. That's how it works. So you can't, the goal at the end of the day is to build a community with your friends and people of liked interests. And you can't do that if you don't interact. So if I'm going to give anybody advice at all, it's please interact with people. I promise you it's not as scary or as hard as you make it, as at least my mind makes it out to be. And I have to say, I get so much more feedback. I get so much more like positive interaction. I get way more back than I ever thought I would. And in my opinion, I've only given like maybe 20 minutes out of my day to like, leave comments, interact, read. Like it really does not take that much of your time. A lot of time we'll see that we always have some kind of downtime in our day somewhere. It adds up. Take that downtime you have and just like do that, I guess, quote unquote work if you struggle to do that. Just go on, be genuine. That's the main thing. Don't just do the emoji thing. Everyone sees past that like single like emoji or shallow comment. It's very obvious. If you have, I guess if you don't have anything substantial to say, just don't say anything at all. A like and then move on is also okay. Just it's a
Mhm.
practice thing, but absolutely try to be engaging because you will absolutely get it back.
Yeah, and I think on the interaction front, I think some people, as you said before, there's a bit of an ego problem where people just kind of expect that people will see their skill and they'll just come to them, and they
Yes.
don't. Yeah, and they don't really put that kind of work in.
Yes, absolutely. And honestly, like I think we all have that part of that inside us that doesn't that doesn't make you a bad person. I think we're very proud of the things that we make, and I think that's justified. But
Yeah,
I think everyone feels that way about their stuff. So, unfortunately, the thing that you make might be wonderful, but so does everyone else thinks what they made is also wonderful. So I think you have to share that. Be very good about something that I learned in human relationships, and like in real life, something that I work on with like my family, my friends. Something that I'd like to improve on is sharing joy.
yeah,
And it's the simple thing of if somebody comes to you and they tell you about like anything that's important to them, you must show interest and show excitement and show love. And a lot of times this is very easy, especially for somebody that you care about. But sometimes, like I think the best example is when a little kid comes up to you and it's like, "Look, I found this pencil on the ground. It's dirty, but it has colors on it." You have to show joy. "Yes, that's amazing. I'm so glad you found this. It makes me happy. You're happy." That means everything to this little kid. And I think everyone needs this no matter what age. So that's kind of, I think, how you get success on social media. It's sharing joy.
yeah. I think that's a really nice message to give people, and hopefully, a lot of people will, they'll take that message away and follow through with it.
I hope so. I think it would make everyone's time on social media at least slightly better.
Yeah, definitely. Especially since it is ultimately supposed to be a community, and people are supposed to be having fun interactions and not arguing all the time.
Yeah, I also kind of think there's this kind of there's a kind of weird pressure to be famous in a
Yeah,
way. I just want, whoever needs to hear this, um, your worth is not in the numbers of followers you have at all.
absolutely.
There's absolutely no worth in that. It doesn't signify that, it definitely feels very good when you do get a follower, but people follow you and unfollow you for different reasons, and there's no way for you to actually quantify that. It just doesn't work that way, and frankly, it's a made up idea. You know, the
Hmm.
moment you put down your phone, you turn off your laptop or computer, it's a nothing. It doesn't technically exist anymore in your life, and your value is way more than that. It's absolutely way more than that, especially, you know, you're a human being with thoughts, ideas. You're creating something, a book, a movie, you know, you're a baker, you're an artist, whatever thing that you are working towards, that's the thing that gives you purpose and gives you happiness. And at the end of the day, that's the thing that gives you value. And I think that's where you should be focusing your energies on. That would just, I think, help just make you happy in its own way. Just just don't look at those numbers. They don't mean anything, I promise.
Hopefully, everyone agrees.
Yes, it's a tough thing to do. I do understand that though. It's very everything is number driven. I think as especially as an accountant, people like neat numbers. People like to quantify things through just an amount of something to know progress, and that's just not what that is at all. That's unfortunately that is a way for the platform to keep you on the platform and to sell you things. That's what that is.
Yeah. So
So
hopefully, if you're listening to this, you take that message away and yeah, remember that your worth is in yourself.
absolutely. Just do make the thing you want to make and be unbothered by it. That's a step in the right direction.
So I'm gonna let you go here,
All
but
right. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
yeah, thank you. I've had a really good conversation. So it's Ash Days, the Giant of Greywater. Where can people follow you?
I have all of my social media, Instagram, Reddit, Twitter. It's all under Ash Days. Um, the Giant of Greywater is on Webtoons. It's also on Tapas, Global Comics. OX Manga is another one. So it's whatever your reading preferences. They're all on there.
All right, fantastic. So just look up Ash Days and you'll find the comic.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time, Ashley.
Thank you. I appreciate you coming on.
Of course, of course. I look forward to talking to you another time.
You too.
All right.